everybody, and a very warm welcome to our next edition of Business for Humanity, a journey of discovery for thought and change leaders who want to seek to reinvent capitalism. And today it's my greatest pleasure to introduce a session on local futures and the economics of happiness with our special guest, Helena Norberg Hodge. But as always, let's open the collective space on this call with a quick check-in. So if I could ask everybody to go onto the chat and please, in 4 or 5 words, let us know where you're dialing in from, your role in life, or the role you want to take up on this call, and maybe a discovery question. Is there something you can share about something your business or you personally have done that has the world of business a little bit better in the last 3 to 4 months? So please go onto the chat now and salute your fellow travelers. And whilst you're getting busy on the chat, I want to start today by thanking you all for making the time to join us. Helena already said in the pre-call that it seems the worst thing that has happened to us is we don't have time anymore. We don't have time to talk. We don't have time to think. So I want to really thank everybody who's joining us live and everybody who's going to watch the recording for taking out the time to think, because I believe we are creating something quite unique together. To my knowledge, this is not only the most wide-ranging inquiry into alternatives of capitalism, but it's also the only one that provides a consistent, credible, and critical framework for the analysis of these paradigms, which hopefully will enable us all not only to more effectively compare all the different proposals that we're hearing during the daily discourse that we're having, but also, as Kees is always reminding me, to inspire us to become much more effective change agents. So thank you very much for that. And let me also remind you that there are lots of resources that can help you to get quick access to the paradigms that we're discussing. So on the website, you will find a lot of Helena's resources. You will find a summary of her book, and you will find our analysis of the book that we're discussing today, which is about local futures, with many more reference links. And also within 7 days of the session, you will find all the recordings. So please make use of the resources. And also, if you want to go back to the resources from the past, to the editions from the past, you will find them all there. With that said, Helena, I want to introduce you. It's a real pleasure to have you on this call. Helena, for everybody, is a star in the localization movement, if I can say that. A celebrated author, a filmmaker, a global pioneer in this localization framework. She has founded Local Futures, an international non-profit organization dedicated to revitalizing cultural and biological diversity and strengthening local communities and economies. And her expertise in environmental sustainability and cultural preservation, economic resilience, and of course, all the experiences she personally took from living in some of these communities is wide-ranging and exceptional, and has earned her the prestigious Right Livelihood Award, often called the Alternative Nobel Prize. And Helena, I heard you have a flu, so a special thanks for making time to join us on the call. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
I'm very happy to be here, despite my flu. It's my favorite topic, thinking
Wonderful.
about how we can change the economy.
And I can tell from the pre-call that we were having that indeed you are very passionate about it, and we are looking forward to Kees introducing you in a second. At this point, let me introduce my friends and fellow travelers on this call. So as usual, from St. Gallen, joining us, Antoinette, as the researcher. Antoinette, hello and good afternoon. Kees from the Netherlands as the activist, and you've read, I'm sure, a lot from Kees over the last few weeks, and I'm sure Kees is going to tell us more about why this situation is becoming more and more critical these days. The voice of the future, Silvio, as always, a pleasure to have the next generation on this call. And of course, the valiant travelers, the valiant explorers, all of you on this call, again, thank you for being there. And a quick look at how the session is going to run. Thanks to the feedback, we have marginally restructured, as you will see here. 2 parts. The first part is about Helena's paradigm, the happiness economics, the local futures. Helena will present after Kees's introduction for about 30 minutes. Antoinette, as always, is going to lead us through your Q&A. I will introduce thereafter. Helena is going to leave it at that point, but thereafter we will go into the meta inquiry. And we will have about 15 to 20 minutes discussion. And I'm really looking forward to it because at the end of this call, we're going to ask you to vote. And of course, you have now 3 paradigms to vote. The Grow the Pie, Pieconomics with Alan, Alex. You have Christian Felber's ECG and Helena's Local Futures and Happiness Economics. So we will see how you will vote at the end of this call. So please don't leave us before the vote, as we want to hear from you. And with that, the warm-up question, which is now becoming a tradition on this call. The warm-up question today is a difficult one. We want to know from you, what is ISDS? Can you put on the chat what you think ISDS, or investor-state dispute settlements, are about? Where do we find them? What's the problem with them? Any views we have on ISDS? Go onto the chat now. We're going to give it a few seconds. And then Antoinette is, in her capacity as the researcher, is going to give us the answer. Any views on ISDS?
That seems to be really difficult.
It is, I mean, we struggled. Helena gave us the challenge with her book, and we struggled. Let's see if anyone has a view. Arjen, you're coming in from The Hague. That must be a good location to know about ISDS.
I think Geneva is probably better.
Geneva is even better, yes. Sorry, no clue. Can be contract resolution between governments. Very good. I think this is a difficult question. Antoinette, shall we go directly to the answer?
Yeah, go ahead. Because I think it's really important that you reminded us of this. It was all over in the press with TTIP. So what is it? It's an investor-state dispute settlement, which is a legal mechanism allowing an investor from one contracting state to bring a claim against another contracting state. But to give you some numbers of its prevalence, these are now found in more than 3,000 trade treaties. So it's really very broad. And up to now, roughly 114 billion US dollars have been awarded to investors from sued states. So the procedure usually entails that both parties choose a arbitration tribunal somewhere with 3 arbitrators. And then mostly that happens behind closed door. And any award determined in this tribunal is final and binding, so no appeals. And of course, there are several big problems, if you can already hear that. These are often very undemocratic and lack the rule of law, as these happen behind closed doors, often remain intransparent, and are said to lack impartiality. And I think most grave of all, they can undermine the regulatory power of states. So I hope that's enough. Look it up.
I think it's already very depressing, Antoinette. And I think, Helena, when we read through it, I was what was the energy company from Sweden?
Vattenfall. Yeah.
There you go, Vattenfall, suing the German government when they started to get themselves out of nuclear energy. So you're getting into these situations where big companies can sue independent states, which is mind-blowing. But with that, I think it's the right time to hand over to Kees to bring us into the myth of the story.
Yes. Well, I'm going to start with showing you a book, Small is Beautiful by E.F. Schumacher. And this book changed my life. It really did. I was studying political science. And as part of our study, we got introduced by economic theory. So we had Adam Smith, we had Karl Marx, we had Keynes, we had Milton Friedman. And in that line, there also was E.F. Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. And I read the book, and it completely blew me away, because this was in the late 80s of the previous century when I studied. And this was very much the age wherein globalism was on the rise. It was the new kid on the block. We can't imagine it because it's only a few decades ago. But in the late 80s, globalization was still a promise, and it was everywhere. And in this book, there was an alternative. And when Shinta and I were compiling and writing our Thrive book, we immediately knew that we had to involve Helena. She was on our wish list. And Helena, I hope you agree with me by stating this, because in my humble opinion, you stand firmly on the shoulders of EF.
Absolutely.
And you are very much keeping his very important legacy alive. So maybe even more urgent than in the 70s and 80s, when EF wrote this wonderful book and shared his philosophy with the world. We are looking at a huge urgency in relationship to globalization, with all the environmental, social, and individual costs that are happening at this moment. So having said that, I am extremely proud that you are in our midst. And I'd like to give you the floor to share your ideas with all of us, so we can all learn from the possibilities, the potential of a locally organized economic system. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. And that couldn't be a better introduction. First of all, I've come to realize that Schumacher had a very similar experience to mine. He went to Burma in the 60s and discovered a culture of happy, healthy people where there was no poverty. This is what happened to me in the mid-70s in Ladakh. And having arrived in this culture where, as I say, there was no poverty and they were the happiest, healthiest people I'd ever encountered, I read his book, and that in Ladakh, actually, after I had been there for a year. And that book is what gave me the audacity to write to the Indian government to say, look, there's another way forward. And it's also a way forward that Gandhi had promoted. So I'm very, very honored. And I also, I believe that it is so much more urgent today, because the trajectory of the economy has not only ignored voices like Schumacher's, but several other economists who have come afterwards, who have raised awareness about the fact that the way the economy is developing is actually making the majority of people poorer. People are having to work longer and harder to just put food on the table and have a roof over their head. That truth is not being allowed to get out, because in supporting an economic path that makes the giants more and more powerful, more and more wealthy, we have supported a path that has enclosed every avenue of knowledge. So from universities to even school books, the media, even science, big money has been paying for the picture, for the type of research. And all the time, not through evil intention, but the big have funded a path that helps them to get even bigger. And I want to show this little animation now, and I would argue that these ISDS clauses that most people have not heard of are the single most important mechanism for us to be looking at, to understand the difference between a capitalism that has gone global and a capitalism that could be subsumed under democratic structures, visible, accountable structures, where society can see where it's going. And so whether it's the grassroots activists trying to protect the environment, whether it's human rights, whether it's poverty, all of the activism has tended to operate from too localized a view. Those who have had the global picture have generally been those that have been promoting this path, which we didn't describe it quite clearly enough. We need to understand that this is about globally active corporations suing government. That's the key. You know, when you say based in another country, it still sounds as though globalization is about relationships between countries. This is not the essential relationship. The relationship is giant monopolies dominating government. So let's look at the video, and I'll say more about it afterwards.
The madness of international trade. In a given year, roughly $250 million worth of butter leaves the UK. Almost exactly the same amount comes back in. Belgium is the world's 4th biggest importer of water and the 6th largest exporter. Since 2021, the US has been exporting over 3 billion pounds of beef every year and importing over 3 billion pounds. These are not exceptional examples. Insane trade is built into our global economic system. The massive ongoing emissions from this global trade are nowhere to be seen in climate negotiations. Instead, the finger is pointed at you. You are told that climate change is a consequence of your individual behavior, your greed, your unwillingness to change your bad habits. But you feel trapped. The cost of living is higher than ever, and day-to-day pressures are overwhelming. Most of the time, you've got to run into the supermarket, grab the cheapest option, and run out. And the cheapest option? Grown in factory farms using toxic chemicals, wrapped twice in plastic and shipped from the other side of the world. And why is it that cheap? How can that possibly be? Because global trade has been the drug of choice for our governments since the days of colonialism. Since then, governments on both left and right have been giving more and more power to global corporations. Decade by decade, they've handed over our jobs, our health, and the whole planet on a silver platter, signing it all away through free trade treaties. Free trade? Freedom for whom? Freedom for the big guys to roam the globe without any restrictions. And in these treaties are clauses where governments are saying to the global traders, yes, we agree, your profit is the most important thing. You can even sue us if we in any way threaten it. Wherever we are, from the US to Bhutan to Sweden, nation states have used our tax money to subsidize and deregulate global corporations and banks, while squeezing local and national businesses through heavy taxation and ever more bureaucratic regulations. Massive ports, airports, and mega highways have been given the red carpet, giving big brands access to every corner of the globe. And big tech, algorithms, and now AI are rapidly speeding up the process of pillage and destruction. A de facto global empire of interlinked banks and corporations has been created far away from the public eye and out of our reach. We've lost sight of the bigger picture. We've lost sight of the insane economy, where food from the other side of the world costs less than food from a mile away. And we haven't seen that the same economy that's trashing the planet is destroying our jobs and making us poorer. We need to become big picture activists, speaking out about how the global system is damaging both people and planet. We need to demand that the democratic process shapes business rather than big business shaping our societies. Our numbers, our real power, far outstrips the tiny minority running the world today. Big picture activism will unite us across social and environmental divides. The rules of international trade are killing us. Let's change them.
So here I'm essentially introducing the path for localization that is a policy path. And my conviction is that that policy change will only happen if we have the beginnings of a movement where social and environmental activists come together to realize that the same policies that are driving up climate change are driving up poverty, destroying, making a joke of democracy, etc., etc. So this policy path is something that I do believe that once the penny drops, that we're getting poorer as the economy grows. I think we may see a very powerful movement like we've never seen, because we're talking about for everyone. We're talking about in India, in China, in America. However, early on when I started my work, I realized that it might be very difficult indeed to change this economic system at that level through policy change. And it really requires enough pressure so that governments would come together, and together governments, pressured by civic society, would start collaborating to regulate global trade, to reduce their dependence on global trade. They must soon wake up to the fact that they are indebted to, they are dependent on global corporations in such a way that they as government are also poorer, relatively poorer. They started this process of PPPs, you know, public-private partnership, because when this process of promoting global trade started, governments were originally in control. It actually started way back when, hundreds of years ago. But even after the Second World War, when it was given a new life with the World Bank and the IMF and the GATT, governments were the ones providing the infrastructure, paying for it, rolling out the red carpet for global traders, global businesses to get richer and richer. But by the sort of 90s, governments were poor compared to these giant monopolies. They were often wealthier than the whole country. So then they're going with their begging bowls to private corporations, basically, and saying, will you have a partnership with us to build this new giant port, this new superhighway, this new speeding up the infrastructure to shrink the world for the needs of corporations? All the time, this promotes monoculture. It cannot do anything but promote monoculture. Biological monoculture is human monoculture, which is why we must turn the other way. And having realized a long time ago how fundamental food is really what we do to food and farming, is what we do to our health and the health of the planet. It was fundamental in our entire evolution. We were connected to the sources of our food, and we were certainly connected to those who grew it. We were connected to the whole process, from planting the seed, the life of the soil, to the food on the plate. I started therefore a long, long time ago encouraging a localization with a central focus on food. And I'm so happy I've done that, because I feel that, you know I have personal experience now of many of these initiatives that have proven so healing to ecosystems, to people. I've seen barren land turn vibrant and flourishing within 3 years in many cases. And I've seen people transform. I've seen prisoners, addicts, depressed people totally transformed by their connection. Now, you probably know that we have a worldwide epidemic of depression. Most people are not clear enough about how much that has to do with our disconnection from nature and our disconnection from community, our deepest sense of humanity as we see ourselves as part of a living culture with people we know, people we have deeper relationships with. So what we've seen is that the awareness is growing, that this depression comes from disconnection. And there's a whole movement now across the world of nature healing. And it involves people sitting in circle. It involves people consciously having deeper, more conscious conversations and building deeper relationships. However, when you add that nature connection to the actual work of learning how to grow things, how to nurture the soil, the earthworms, the seeds, the particular plant, when you engage in that way, in a full-bodied experiential way, we're seeing the healing multiplying. When you add to that you're producing someone that everybody needs and treasures, healthy, wonderful food and people value, and so you're suddenly creating a connection where the production becomes something vitally important. And you can see that you're providing joy and health to other people. I cannot overstress the joy, the healing that comes to human beings, to animals, to plants, and both sides of the equation, from the production to the consumption. So I want to urge everyone listening to support the local food initiatives in their area. I want to urge you to help create more, because in this last 35, 40 years of globalization, our governments have systematically separated us further and further from the source of our food, leading to the insanity we were talking about in the film. It's absolutely mad. And I believe that when we are willing to just take the time to step back and look at the big picture and not be afraid of challenging the power of global banks and corporations. I am very privileged to have known people from the whole chain, from grassroots activists in China, in Japan, in India, in Peru, with the Maasai. Our materials are translated into 50 languages, and we've had contact at the grassroots from all of these cultures, from every continent. We have also had contact with people in business, people in government, and we can see that the main issue is blindness. The issue is not that people in global corporations are more greedy than small farmers. The issue is not privatization versus co-ops. The issue is scale. Scale, scale, scale. And that's why I'm so happy we started by talking about Schumacher and small is beautiful. Scale, the distances, the speed have encouraged blindness and a very dangerous reductionist worldview. So the enemy is not other people. There is no need to demonize any particular sector. But there is a need to very clearly reject a global economic system that cannot respect life, that's incapable of respecting life. And we were talking earlier about the role of finance. I think we will arrive at an understanding that finance needs to be regulated, heavily regulated. We need to move in the direction of a slowing down, a scaling down, and we can simultaneously decentralize economic activity and power from the nation state to the grassroots, while we build up enough political power to start regulating the giant casino economy. And we're talking about particularly a very toxic marriage between Silicon Valley and the financial casino. This is the type of machine which right now benefits from the work of algorithms that, like an army, are moving across the world to drive up polarization, divisiveness, hatred, as we know from the social media. But that casino also serves the war machine. War is lucrative. Generally, breakdown contributes to this type of economic growth. Anyone who's concerned about people or the environment has to look at the economy. We have to start with GDP. GDP measures breakdown when things function in healthy ecosystems, in healthy bodies. There is no money to extract. And when we extract through breakdown, if you and I have cancer and we need long-term treatment, wonderful for GDP. If we stay healthy, we plant our own garden, eat our own fresh food out of our garden, that's bad for GDP. How can we be talking about ecology, justice, democracy, and allow this kind of madness to continue. Now, when I say these things, they sound so extreme, they're barely believable, I'm sure. So I urge you all to look at our website, localfutures.org. We've been working with economists, with activists, with scientists from around the world for nearly 50 years now. And we have a lot of material and a lot of evidence at the grassroots around the world for what we're saying. And I want to say that I believe that our work is a consequence of the fact that I happen myself to be so globalized. I'm Swedish, English, German, and then working in Ladakh or Little Tibet, in Bhutan, ended up with this grassroots, broad experience. And later on, I realized that most people who had that global experience tended to be promoting the global system. And most of the people who were protecting the water, the environment generally, or the poor, were coming from a very localized perspective. So paradoxically, localization requires a broad, holistic, interdisciplinary, but also intercultural dialogue. Very broad, very intercultural, particularly bridging the so-called rich countries and the so-called poor countries. It's about bridging the very urbanized populations with the more land-based population. And this I've found for many people on the left in the West, which have been locked in a very urban reality, locked into an industrial worldview, which believe that industrial agriculture produced more food. Those people have found great joy and hope for the future as they connect with societies where farming has not been destroyed to the extent it has in the industrialized world, where, as you know, in many industrialized countries, only 1% of people are still farming. So in the countries where we're also working, like India and in China and so on, in many cases, 50% of the population are still on the land. And I just want to add to that, that it's often thought that we're far too many people to go back to the land. We are far too many people to afford cities that drive up energy consumption, water consumption, ensure that everyone is dependent on transported food, on transported everything. It's a blindness that now is continuing to drive us in the wrong direction. So localization or decentralization could be brought about very quickly through regulations, to shift us in taxes and subsidies, and change how we measure progress. Now, we could bring that about very quickly. We could show that privatization at a local scale, at a human scale, businesses that provide, whether it's food or furniture or clothing or building materials, in many countries, these were family enterprises that lived for hundreds of years. What is it that today pressures everybody to run faster and faster and bigger? And why are we more and more dehumanized? We've got to look at the role of the economy and how technology has been a central part of that economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I'm going to hand over to Antoinette because I saw a lot of questions in the chat. So let's use the time available to dive a little bit deeper in before you go to bed.
As usual, we want to look at 3 specific aspects. We will look at the ideals and the desirability, and ask what are the core values and ethical principles that underpin the suggested alternative here. Then we are going to look at the institutions. We already heard a lot about it. How feasible is it? And how do they align also with the ideas we were hearing? And then we are going to ask the fundamental question about the transformation, where I saw a lot of questions already. And I think we can see all these three topics also within Helena's work very nicely. So here you can see again how important for her, of course, our values are these institutions and how to really change them for good. And of course, also the way to transformation. So I think that's going to be really exciting. We start with Silvio, who is our younger generation, and his question as a young leader.
Thank you, Antoinette. And thank you that I can start us off here in the Q&A section. What I want to ask Helena, yeah, as I wrote your book, there were so many advantages of the localization and localization movement. But does this localization also comes with the necessity of renunciation, especially when it comes to the younger generation? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think you are imagining that the renunciation is not being able to travel or not being able to have anything from another country. No, I would say you would be able to travel, but it would be usually slower travel. I mean, if the world were to move in a localized direction, it would mean slower travel, and it would probably mean generally shorter distances. But what you would find is that as people all over the world start revitalizing their local economies, you would find far greater diversity, you would find far greater joy in traveling to another place that's really different. We need to wake up to the fact that most of us do not like to fly to the other side of the world and to be served the same McDonald's food and to be surrounded by the same images and to be eating food which is now literally becoming plastic. The logic of where we're going now, if we continue, is pushing fermented bacteria and plastic meat, because we're being told that animals are destroying climate, which is not true. It's factory farming that's destroying climate. So the truth is that I think for young people and for everyone, you would find far greater diversity. Don't forget, you would also have far less pressure. Again, the degree of increased pressure on students through globalization is not being spelled out, but it's true. You've been forced to work harder at university and for a job that you know is harder and harder to come by. You are forced as a CEO of a corporation to rush blindly in fear that when there is that merger, which is an inevitable consequence of this mad rat race, who's going to be on top? Are you going to be the CEO or the other guy? So we need to step back, slow down, really look at this system, and we will see whether as a young person or as a CEO, there is so much to gain by a slowing down and a flowering of real cultural biological diversity. We are also talking about the deep connections that are necessary to feel that you have an identity as an individual. We're actually talking about a path of recovering genuine individualism. This system that pushes McDonald's everywhere is touted as a system that allows for individualism. Opposite. So, yeah, that's probably a long enough answer.
Thank you.
Perfect answer, I assume. I would then give over to Otti, who will start us off with the values.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thanks for the inspirational and passionate talk, Helena. It wasn't very visible apart from the coughing that you had a flu. I thought the passion was definitely coming through. I want to ask, I was a little bit puzzled about, I think, two things. You draw a very stark juxtaposition in your book between globalization and localization. And you say you don't really want to draw the distinction too hard, but I think you actually do. And I wonder if there are not some challenges with that. And I want to give you two. The first was, I remember the Brexit vote in The Economist, there was a lot of talk about the nowheres against the somewheres. And the somewheres in this case were the local, closely minded, anti-global, anti-international, pro-Brexit people. So there was a direct correlation between being anti-global with being anti-humanistic, if you want, right? So is there not a risk that the anti-global movement is becoming very populist nationalist? And the second thing, when I was reading your book, I grew up in a small village, and I had the cows looking into my window, so it couldn't get any more rural, so to speak. That is not the environment that I would like to live in. And I think many people, and you speak 7 languages, I read, so many people are benefiting from the global and open world that we have. So is there not, again, a challenge with idolizing and idealizing that communal, local, proximus kind of living?
Yes, I mean, very, very good questions. And what makes my work so difficult, I really see that if I had not experienced a functioning entire economy and culture that was functioning as Ladakh did and as Bhutan did, I would not have come to this very clear conclusion that we need to move towards the local. But once I had those lenses in my eyes, and I started seeing the desperate destruction that was going on, so that even in the 70s, when I went back to Sweden, I suddenly understood why there was so much depression already then. One person living alone, half the dwellings, one person living alone, alcoholism, depression, suicide. And I realized that driving the majority of the population away from the land, destroying smaller towns, and creating these megalopolis structures was a disaster. Now, if we had cities that were in balance with their environment, if we allowed people who were well paid and who were farmers and were happy to stay on the land, if they had the respect they should have, if they had the remuneration they should have, I think you would see that it would be a world that would be better for everyone. Now, what I've also found is that it's the people precisely who have traveled a lot who have come to the conclusion that place-based, community-based, deeper structures and connections are vital for our happiness and well-being. So when I spell out very stark differences between the global and the local, I'm talking about this system. I'm talking about a choice between man-made structures that guide our relationship to nature and to others. I am not saying that when you grew up in your village in Switzerland, that this was the ideal. And I also, and in fact, I can tell you, I can show you that the destruction of local, that is the destruction of nature, the nature-based thinking, it started with the Inquisitions. It started with a Christianity that was patriarchal, that burned women as witches at the stake. So I'm coming from a path towards nature connection, towards a more feminine culture. I'm not coming from Switzerland, 30 years ago. Also, I want you to know that in Scandinavia, we had many strong movements that resisted going into the EU. So we were part of no campaigns because we knew that the economic union was one pushed by global businesses that wanted to compete with America. And they needed standardization. They called it harmonization, but they needed to do away with different languages, driving on the left, driving on the right. All that diversity is messy and counterproductive for big business. We have to understand that we're distinguishing between the efficiencies of extracting wealth for fewer and fewer people versus how we people will thrive as human beings, as unique beings, connected to others. And there, the localization I'm promoting is based on that more indigenous, feminine way. And it's not to be found in a rural local community today even in India or China or America, most of them have been affected by centuries of making farmers look stupid and backward, romanticizing the bankers and the clever ones who went to the city. Now we're facing the truth that this patriarchal system that was quite fun for a lot of young men simply doesn't suit life. It's not working. It's killing the planet. And we need to know where that comes from. And we have to stop lying about the idea that this is from overpopulation and that we're too many people to go back to the land. Wherever we are, we're going to depend on the land. And we need to really have a closer relationship with that land. Sorry.
Maybe Helena, I can do something which goes into the direction you were just picturing, but Context Collective, that's, I don't know who's behind that, came up with a very good question of how to get back or get there, because and I just want to read the question because it's a nice question. So he says, the normal relieves you from relating. That was a statement he heard yesterday, and it deeply resonated because the need for relating has never been greater as now, as you also say that. And at the same time, the reflex to have business as normal never has been more predominant. So how do we deal with that paradox?
Well, again, I think it's through holistic, interdisciplinary, big picture education. And I believe that needs to include films and visuals. It needs to include being willing to journey back to the first encounters with indigenous people, where we can find so much evidence now that on the first encounter, the European explorers wrote about how beautiful and peaceful these people were. And then as they start robbing their land, they describe them as these, primitive animals, and then, start hunting them. So really, I am talking about a trajectory that started with slavery, that started with white Westerners thinking they could hunt down people like animals, that were not conforming to this idea that we had to be civilized, that we had to have progress that made us better. This constantly being better is something that I've also found more extreme in cultures like America and Australia. It's not as extreme in Switzerland or in many parts of Europe yet, but it's a disease that comes with a faith in the idea that life has to mean constant progress. And we haven't understood how severely that damages us. I would actually, as I say this, I also want to point out that I'm becoming aware that in psychology, no one ever studied healthy people. I feel so qualified to write books about psychology and mental health. I just haven't taken the time because I'm trying to raise awareness about the economic system that is so rapidly expanding to create a war machine, So on the other hand, I feel that having seen step by step people who had the deepest self-confidence I had ever experienced. I spoke the language fluently, and I saw how even 4-year-old children were affected by a propaganda machine that created the illusion of happiness and wealth somewhere else on the screen. People were not having to work. They were so wealthy. They were so happy. And I've seen how that affects us as well. Mature adults living in our nuclear families, we are subjected to the idea that, oh, well, everybody else has so much fun and is so sexy, and you're not just a mother, you're a lawyer, you're famous, you're rich. It romanticizes this existence, which makes us feel like behind our 4 walls, like we don't have anything and life is so boring. So one of the wonderful things that's happening through more conscious localization is that when people realize how empty that is, how destructive it is, and they try to connect more deeply to real people and real places and real animals, they actually start experiencing how much happier they feel. And so I really can't stress that enough, that even Jung never had the opportunity to live with indigenous people who were clearly much happier. That meant that he also fed a little bit the myth in Europe, in the West, that, well, indigenous people, yeah, that was okay, but they didn't learn how to individuate. And I have to say, you know, every child that is born from his mother's womb never for a minute thinks it's one and the same with the mother. That's not an issue. The issue is that in the West, we ended up caught up in a system that tried to tell us that feeling connected was backward and primitive, and the worldview that the Ladakis had, but you know, most indigenous people in one form or another, was this constant reminder that actually we may seem very separate, but at a deeper level we're connected. So there is that deep, you know, if you want to call it spirituality, it's the reminder that all of life is one, it's interconnected, it's interdependent. What we do to one part of the web of life has an effect on the whole web. So that reminder is what we lost. And we do not need, when we do feel connected and we do respect the rest of life, we do not need some reminder about being separate. That's a, you know, something that is so clear and so recognizable.
Well, I'm also glad that you are now shared with us the deep spirituality, which is also in your approach. And I think that really belongs also to what we were looking for with the values to understand it better. But I want us to move to something more harder or tangible, to the institutions. And I think because we started the conversation before everybody joined, you were also talking about finance. So I would want to ask you, how should we regulate finance, or in a different matter, if that's closer to your home, how and how much can solidarity finance carry a localized system?
Well, I think, again, what's so clear is that when we've tried to create structures that are ethical and accountable, and they are global, so that we're dealing with people that we never see, we have no idea, it's not the best way to go. And that's why decentralization, really back to what countries previously had, which was the right to control their own currency. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about modern monetary theory, but you know, modern monetary theory is basically saying we need to understand that countries are letting banks print the money, and countries are going into debt to banks. There's no need to do that. I will try to do visuals where I show that, you know, we are now dependent on this sort of global empire of interlinked banks and corporations, and mediating between that empire and us is governments. So all around the earth, when government representatives seek election, they talk to us about our jobs, about climate, about things we care about. But once in power, they're taking the orders from this big interlinked empire. And the orders are, you've got to do everything to make us grow, and you've got to overregulate and tax the rest so that we can destroy our small competitors. It's absolutely terrible, and it's ridiculous that this can continue, but it's only because no one is briefed with stepping back to look honestly at the role of that global system. So I think the path forward would be very clear once we understand that we need to be working with local, and that means place-based businesses. So the first thing we should be doing is shifting the power to a bank inside our country that has overviews, that is regulated and controlled through democratic process. But at the table has to be civic society. People don't trust government anymore. And by the way, that was another thing that you were saying, is that the tragedy is that because people are not being allowed to see that the real government is a global interlinked empire, because they're not seeing that their frustrations now about jobs, about the environment, means rejecting government. And that's the swing to the right. That's the type of populist swing that becomes very frightening, because whether it's Trump or people around the world now say, forget about government, they are giving more power to the global empire. They're not about decentralizing the economy. So they're the opposite of localization, the opposite, exact opposite. But on the surface, so these issues do need more time to, to spell out. But please do look at the truth of that the swing to the right is essentially people are fed up with government and have almost no awareness of the actual government behind them. So to come back to finance, it would be relatively easy practically to do it. It's the political will. But let's remember when we talk about political will, that the number of people inside those global corporations is tiny. They're a tiny minority, far less than 1% of the global population. I'm talking about in terms of the leadership that's still pushing actively to go more global. Far less than 1%. 80 million people, 1%.
Yeah, and I mean, I hear you, and I also hear you that we would have to educate and to understand, and that would be a big help, of course, but you're also talking about the political will. And here I also have a very plastic question, which is about the treatments, the trade treatment. So Oleg is saying the Danish government is worried about withdrawing from the agreements on opening new drilling fields in the North Sea, with one of the reasons being that they could be sued by companies with contracts or hoping to win them. So, I mean, that's of course a difficult question, but how are we going to create a political will here? How could they work together with other countries, for instance? How do you see the switch happening?
I say, again, the switch would happen just like that if the Danish government were forced to represent their people. But it would mean that their people would need to understand that choice. And they also would need to be educated enough on the fact that supporting those global corporations is why they are working harder and harder and rushing faster and faster to stay in place. So much of it is about education, and whether targeted in Denmark or why we've ended up just sort of spreading the word wherever we can, because ultimately we need a global movement. But I'm so glad that you're doing this as an educational process. And I hope that you'll, I really hope that this will get out widely and that you will do everything you can to get the word out widely. And let's remember that right now we're not getting this information because big money is preventing this big picture from getting out, actively preventing it. So there are think tanks that are coming up with studies that tell us we've got to urbanize, we're too many people. It's really very unfortunate. Regenerative agriculture is now being pushed as a way of preventing a focus on local food economies. So the more systemic, interdisciplinary view that we desperately need, and the respect for experiential knowledge, for local knowledge, the squashing of studies, like there was a big global study, YASTAD. I don't know if you heard of it. Probably you didn't. But so this study, YASTAD, stands for the International Assessment of Agricultural Science and Technology for Development. It was a 3-year study, and it was, it proved conclusively that industrial agriculture can't feed the world. When it was completed after 3 years, having been initiated by the World Bank and done with 53 countries, big business had thought they were going to be able to push genetic engineering. The opposite happened. And so this whole results of that study were squashed. So almost no one has heard of it. And so that means that we need to be thinking more about money for education. And I myself should be trying to focus more on that. We need big money to help get a different picture. Even if that picture is not conclusive, at least let's look honestly at the current system.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always for more money for more education. I believe it's really important. But we're almost at the end. I just want to give Kees a chance because he has certainly one last question for transformation. Sorry, Kees, I was always invading your domain.
Oh, no, just Chris. No, Helena, so my job now at the University of Applied Science where I work is to see how we can engage our students and lecturers. So how we can get them more involved in, well, basically their lives and their world to take more, agency. So what I was wondering, because you have a lot of experience already with local community builders, what is it, in your opinion, what drives people to become activists, to become community builders locally? Is that the environmental drive? Is that social drive? Is that individual drive? Is it an economic drive? What do you think?
No, until now, I'd say it's been mainly environmental. And so things like the transition town movement was very much around peak oil and climate change and and generally nature. There haven't been that many community initiatives that are actually about economic well-being. And it's also partly been fairly middle-class people who are well off enough to be concerned about the environment. But there's a huge potential to bring in precisely these people who are voting for Trump and so on into an economic agenda. And I think once the picture really merges so that the people more on the left and green understand the other side, and equally on the sort of right-wing side, once they understand the economic side, there's just this huge potential for a very big and powerful movement like we've never had before.
Thank you very much. I can work with that.
Thank you so much, Helena, again for making the time. And we know we've gone 5 minutes over, but it was a great pleasure to speak to you. I also, again, want to take the opportunity to remind people about Closer to Home, the movie that you've produced. Please watch it. The World Localization Day, I forgot to mention it in the beginning, 21st June, but during the whole month, there are lots of events. Please have a look at the Local Futures website or local worldlocalizationday.org, if I'm getting this right. So everybody, please have a look at all the resources also on the website. And again, Helena, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And actually, just quickly, the website is localfutures.org. Very simple. Maybe you can put it in chat.
It's also on the resources website. And again, we make sure that it's everywhere. And good luck with all the many things that you're driving, Helena.
And good luck with what you're doing. It's very important. Thank you.
Hey, you be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay, wonderful. Wow, what another very interesting session. And a big thanks to Antoinette for trying to lead us through the many questions and all the interesting points that came through the Q&A. We will certainly pick those up. If you have additional questions, please put them on the chat. Sylvia is going to bundle them and send them to Helena for answers. They will appear on the website as well. And of course, now we're going to go into the plenary very soon. But before we do that, we will open the transformation laboratory. So as usual, we'll try to analyze the happiness economics or local futures paradigm that Helena is proposing using our standard toolkit. And you will see, and especially Antoinette is going to explain to you where we have amended the toolkit since the session with Alex. So we're constantly revising whether the tools that we are proposing to you are useful and actually allow us to deepen the analysis as we want to. So without further ado, let me start with the usual slide. You will remember this one by now. So we have a standard flow chart, if you want, of a capitalist economy. You can see the standard actors between the businesses, the government, the financial sectors, production flows, financial flows. And we already told you a few times that based on the 99% Economy, a wonderful book, we have identified a number of direct crises and indirect crises that we are seeing as the meta crisis, the poly crisis connected with capitalism. So we can plot them to a degree on these flowcharts. And then the question becomes to all our wonderful guests, how they would try to change the standard economy to remediate these problems. So let's see quickly what we've heard so far. You will remember, if you joined us, there was Alex last time who said, well, you know what, we don't need that much new stuff. You can see there's a little bit of reliance on redistribution policies in the government, but those are mainly already there, in the social welfare states at least. So what we need is primarily the finance sector and a little bit the captains of industry to change their mindset from pie splitting to pie growing, become more purpose-oriented, and look at social value rather than just profit. Then you had Professor Felber, as I will call him, Christian Felber, with the Economy for Common Good, who said, no, you must be kidding. We need a lot more. And look especially at the red stuff. So the red stuff is directly intervening into the flows of the economy. The blue is policy and the green is the focus areas for the economy of the common good. And boy, if you read the book, or if you look at the website summary, there is a lot. And that's why we classified him as socialist in the end, because there's a huge degree of state control coming into the economy. So a big change from Alex, and maybe no surprise that half of the people stuck with Alex when we asked them to vote. Right, and now we're getting to local is our future, happiness economics with Helena. And again, if you've read the book or if you look at the website, again, it's quite interesting. The focus is on policy changes, the blue stuff. She's asking to actively reduce globalization and support localization. And you heard it a little bit when she spoke with Antoinette on some of the questions. In addition, of course, there's a very specific focus on localization of business. And as Antoinette just probed again, the relocalization through trade pacts. So changing the trade pacts back to, at least for global produce, have global, for local produce, have the local country first. So we wouldn't be importing goods that we can produce nationally. And that needs to be rectified in the trade pacts. The other thing that I want to call out before I move into the details is maybe there's also a little bit, Case and I were discussing with, depending on where people come from, they choose their heroes. So for Alex, the heroes were investment bankers, right? So he was proudly wearing his jumper from, what was it, Morgan Stanley on the call, right?
JP Morgan.
Oh, JP Morgan, apologies. JP Morgan, that was probably a very bad remark. So JP Morgan, so the heroes in Alex Economics were investment bankers changing their mindsets. The heroes with Christian Felber were almost economy professors, right? They were looking at every single detail and essentially kind of re-engineering the whole economy. With Helena, I would almost say, Case, it's like social activists. It's people like in the local communities that love the communities. You heard about care ethics and so on. So these are her people, her heroes, and maybe no surprise that the results from these suggestions is in that direction. So again, what I want to invite everybody on the call to is always think, one, can you locate where people are suggesting to make interventions? B, where are they personally coming from? And might that influence what they're suggesting? But of course, we wouldn't be here with two top-class economists or academics on this call if we would stop here. So let me go into the three sections of the framework. Firstly, values. Antoinette is going to talk about institutions. Case is going to dissect the theory of change. So on values, you will remember this was our framework. So you have contemporary political ideologies, and our suggestion is that many of the political economics, the economical stories that you hear day in, day out on social media or in the news, are shaped very strongly by these political thoughts, which ultimately go back to value systems. And Case is always saying stories are very important. So listen to the stories and try to put them into the different color buckets. And I think one thing that Anton and I were reflecting about was, if you think about it, Alex was so far the only person arguing that we could remediate capitalism. Everybody else is saying we need to fundamentally change it. And we're now really going into a panacea, into a big landscape of different theories. We're going to have lots of people coming to us now, and it's going to be quite hard to continue to put them into different buckets. So we've just tried to put some initial hypothesis forward for you to look at where might people fit. So we are suggesting most of the conscious capitalism or sustainability movement is going to be in the libertarianism, neoliberal bucket on the bottom left. Then in this kind of orange modern liberalism, we will have welfare capitalism, the triple bottom line stuff, post-growth, steady state, donut economics. Our initial hypothesis is they will be there. We will suggest that what Helena is talking about is mostly fitting the green communitarianism, and you will see that come through, especially when we go into Antoinette's part. But this is classified very often as social and solidarity economy, SSE. But there are also some other frameworks like cooperative movements, Ubuntu, or participatory economics. And then, of course, we have the red ones where already we've put the economy for common good, but we believe that many of the ecological economics that you will hear from very soon and degrowth economics might also come from a Marxist or socialist tradition. But we leave that here as a hypothesis. We will find out. And you see the arrows on this chart. Maybe one of the things that could trigger your thinking when you read the frameworks that are coming in the next weeks or next months. We have a sense that in modern liberalism, there's always there's a forward arrow. There's a belief in progress, a belief in perfectionism, a belief in growth. Communitarianism is harmony, steady state, or backwards. I think you heard Helena talk a lot about going back to the past, the Crusades, the hunter-gatherers, the local indigenous communities, and so on. So there's a lot of spirit going to some sometimes idealized or idolized back. And on the left side, I think we have two different types of idealism. We have the idealism at the bottom, which is looking to the stars, to some sort of ideal, transcendent, religious utopia, whereas the socialists are looking to material improvement. They're not so interested in ideals and ideas. They're interested in here, how do we resolve the class struggles between the people that have and the people that have not, to give people materially better standings in the world. So maybe this is a little bit helpful to help you to look at, okay, someone is coming to me with an idea, which color is it? But we want to give you another hint. And you heard, oh, before I go there, and here's a slide, you will find it in the pack, that defines what a social and solidarity economy is. So it's very centered on this idea of proximity, you heard it, and of care for the other, care for the world, or the earth almost, right? So it's this idea of the place that you're in, or sometimes idealized, anthropomorphized as Gaia, so this kind of the spirit of the earth, right? So this is very often an idea that you will find in this type of SSE. But we wanted to bring out one other interesting differentiator. And Helena mentioned GDP. And I saw on the chat, lots of you picked up GDP. And I think we have talked about GDP forever. Someone, I've forgotten the name on the chat, said that we've kind of critiqued GDP for 100 years. Why do we still have it? And indeed, it's a very good question. And one aspect might be it's ideological. Because again, we would suggest that GDP in some way supports neoliberalism. Why? Because everything, as Helena pointed out, that has a market value, or better, a market price, is considered valuable. So as she said, if you have cancer treatment, which gives pharmaceutical companies a lot of income, that is GDP enhancing. If you're doing something in your home economy where you're working for free, or exchanging gifts, or you're doing something to take externalities away, that's actually not contributing to GDP. And here are some of the very interesting alternative frameworks, if you're interested in other measures. So we believe that we will find with the Republican or modern liberal orange, very often measures like Human Development Index or the Social Progress Index. So these are indicators that are looking much more at things like freedom and lack of an absence of domination for all the interested stakeholders. So you're finding much more interested in different stakeholders, not just the economic ones, and of course a much greater role for government in distributive justice, in giving all people their due part. And then interestingly, in Helena, you will actually find references to both GPI, a very interesting indicator called Genuine Progress Indicator, based on an earlier indicator called ISEW, which takes things like, you can see it there, volunteer work or pollution or the benefits of social local economies into account. But she also references the gross national happiness product, which many of you might be familiar with from Bhutan. which we will suggest also represents a lot of traditional values. So you get some of the conservative aspects of the, what I said, backward looking, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way here, just in a factual way. So there's an ideal that might lie in the past, which people aim to reinstall because they recognize it as something important, valuable in their respective community. So you get some of this conservatism. And then socialism, we're still trying to find out what the indicators are. In Marxism, of course, you have this theory that national output is made of three parts. It's the capital, which gets reinstated. It's the profit from capital, and it's wages from labor. So you would expect to have indicators that show the difference between how much of the national income is going to wages for labor and how much is being extracted as profit to capitalists. And we've tried to get some indicators there, but it's hard. And so far as idealism, we've classified the SDGs, even if, as Antoinette and I always say, you find in the SDGs really a bit of a scattergun of different philosophies and ideals. It's not so easy to just say SDGs are representing one ideal. Right? There are lots of problems with the SDGs. But maybe this is, again, a helpful initial reference point for you to look at some of the different measures. And with that, I close the value section and hand over to Antoinette for institutions.
Yeah, just one short remark. We're going to talk to the person who initiated the GPI in the next session, just as a background, Roberto Costanza. Okay, so I just tell you how we changed this institution framework for those of you who have been with us before already. Because we adapted it not least also thanks to Helena. What you see here in addition is now E, because we believe that we need to center stage an additional actor, which we kind of have forgotten before, and that's the big global company, which by its size and often not only by its market power, has gained strong influence on policy making and setting the normative rules of the game. So we really have to take that into our analysis. And second, we also added C, the entrepreneurial state, because we believe states do not only, like in control or like in a mixed economy, are catering for pre and redistribution, but they also create and shape markets through industrial policies. So just to give you the background how we changed that. And on the next slide, I'm going to dive deeper into where Helena mostly sees how institutions would have to change. And in a nutshell, I can say, and I think you heard that loud and clearly, that she wants to show us how we can really, how much globalization is currently favored and how we can rebalance that with a move towards localization. So for instance, if we go to the mixed economy, her suggestions for redistribution, and I just pick a few because I'm not going to read all to you. In agriculture, for her, she clearly says, at present, big is beautiful, not small, and she wants to redirect subsidies to small and sustainable farming. Or if we go to finance, we started to talk about it with her. In her book, she sees the problem of financialization, the growing interest to make money with structured products, and then often at the same time, the ensuing discrimination of the credit market, particularly for small and medium-sized companies. And I saw there are quite a number of Swiss people in here. That's exactly what people are now saying UBI is doing right now. So in infrastructure, she believes that the funding of motorways is mainly pulling us towards globalization and is hindering localization. So you also get a little bit of the peculiarities of this approach. And in media, she said that also several times, it's in the hands of too few, and it's also problematic for the ideal living standards it's kind of promoting, which is all Western, I would say American dream kind of pictures with all the problems coming from that. And then if you go to the entrepreneurial state, she really says, how can the state support local markets? So for agriculture, to take up the same examples, she's saying, well, education and farming practices, even in school, is important, building new public markets or initiating public food councils. So some of her ideas. In finance, we heard her, she argues for governments to install public banks or to support community banks. Infrastructures, here she's really thinking, how can we support community life, have town halls, make sure that we have community centers, so how can we reinvigorate community life? And then if we also go to media back, the support of local newspapers or local TV is recommended. And I think last but not least, and that came through very strongly in what she was telling us, she is advocating for education, education, education. So this is all about framing the issues more clearly, bring these also on the political table, support an alternative narrative, creating knowledge on best practices, tools and techniques, a lot on her website again, and distill successful examples of localization. So Bella was asking that you find a lot of examples on her website. And here I think she really wants to transpire hope, it's possible, it's good. So I think these are the three levers in the institutional framework I would want to emphasize. But we're not quite finished with that, because I think we all realize that we are going beyond classical capitalist institutions, and that's why we brought up a new slide where we try to bring in alternatives. And I just walk you through on the left-hand side where this is about diverse economics. Let's not just look at capitalist, let's do that with the example of the market. So we here see we also have alternative markets. And that's, of course, huge, to be honest, because it's the informal economy as an example. We might have local trading systems or even local currency, which is quite often experimented these days. And then you can see a little bit more on the other side, also non-markets, if we stay with the market by example, which provide provisioning. And here, of course, state allocation is one example, gift giving, and there was a huge discussion going on the chat. It could be also self-subsistence, so hunting and fishing, for instance. But I want to finish that up with the figure on the right, which tells us we also have to look at the broader ecosystem, how sector, places, and these diverse economics are linked. That's what they try to show with this picture. Because taking on board both these diverse economics and distributed place-based economics gives us a much fuller picture. But then, of course, it also shows the complexity of provisioning, which is clearly going beyond the dichotomy of global versus local. So there would be a lot to go deeper into if we had time here. Just wanted to open that up for you.
Excellent. And sorry, the Wi-Fi is not working. Over to Kees to transformation.
Yes, so let's dive into the theory of change or the strategy of change of Helena's local economics approach. So what we can see in our opinion is that local economics is let's say a double-edged sword. It has two narratives at the same time. So there is the anti-globalist narrative, which is clearly orange and focuses on the reform of institutions. So there's a lot of emphasis on political pressure. But on the other side, there's also a very firm green narrative in there about the grassroots local approach, which is much more about rebuilding the economy or rebuilding the community by trying to change the civic behavior. We think it's quite crucial to acknowledge that anti-globalism or an anti-global approach or an anti-global strategy or an anti-global theory is not the same as a local theory of change or a local strategy of change. They are distinct quite firmly, actually. So to adapt international or national policy and politics demands a fundamentally different set of activities than to instigate local action. It's basically top down versus bottom up. It is policymakers or trying to change policymakers rather than versus community makers. Very specifically, very different. And so to scale up localism as an alternative to globalism we think feasibility is the biggest challenge. Well, as you can hear from Helena earlier, there is a lot of desirability in there, and also eligibility, but is it feasible? Can we make it happen? Is a locally organized world feasible? Will it work in practice? Is it feasible to create local subsistence? And although E.F. Schumacher, we mentioned him right at the start of this session, did make a start with working out, let's say, a proper economic theory or local economics, there is still a lack of sufficient research data. Antoinette, Otti, Silvio, and I, we try to dive deep into the existing and available data. And there is research, there is data, there is empirical data, but in all honesty, it is quite ambiguous and even paradoxal. So I would like to take you through a couple of examples. So on the one hand, we can see that some aspects of local organized food production and consumption, one of the key pillars of a localized economic systems are working out. You could hear Helena just mentioning that the key driver of people active in community building, local community active, is ecologically driven and environmental driven, which is actually exactly what research data shows. But on the other hand, as the same research data shows, from an economical perspective, it doesn't work so well. So if we continue with the next slide, we might have not only a policy issue ahead or a policy challenge, but also an ontology. So how do we look upon our food systems and the way that we provision for food? If we can go on to the next slide. Sorry, yeah. So what we now see is indicators that support, you could say, the potential of a bottom-up and place-based local approach, especially from a drives perspective, from a motivational perspective. But on the other hand, we found information like this one from the latest Ipsos Global Trends research, that basically shows that whereas there is a lot of potential for a place-based local movement, there is also a trend that is quite contrary. There is, on the other hand, a peak globalization happening. So we see that there is a tremendous amount of people that think globalization is good. It's good for the country. It's good for their personality. And on the next slide, you can see that that in the majority in most markets, in the top 5 markets, feel that globalization is a force for good. So we heard a lot of examples by Helena how globalization is driving environmental and social degeneration and destruction. But what we also find in this data is that a lot of people are quite enthusiastic about globalization. It works for them. And one of the indicators that we also found really interesting is an enormous, basically you could say, return of the popularity of global brands. So one of the indicators could be that the dominance of local corporates or international corporates and international brands like McDonald's, who we named earlier on, are on a decline, but actually they're on a rise again. And one last indicator that is really important, that also from a policy perspective, so we know that anti-globalism needs policy interventions to work. We need the politics. And well, basically, politics is not working in favor of a localization of the world economy. It's actually the other way around. We see that most politics is based or geared towards more globalization rather than more localization. So maybe, and this is my 2 cents, maybe therefore it's worthwhile to try to see if we can escape this catch-22 that is basically in this by using an activist approach. Yeah? So maybe if we look upon the ecological issues that are influencing us, disrupting us, climate change, biodiversity collapse, environmental pollution, we can see that the way that we produce, consume, and distribute goods at this moment on a global, from a global perspective, is troublesome. We know it comes with a cost. So if we don't find ways to make either the global economy ecologically sound or the local economy economically sound, we will end in deeper shit than we are already in. And so I hope that this will help to find ways to merge these two rather than create more distinction between those two.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I think, so where does this leave us? So having used the framework as always, so I think on the value system, we are opting for a communitarian strategy. On the institutions, you've heard Antoinette, lots of policy, education on local people, best practice sharing, and so on. And you heard Kees. So it's not entirely clear that this localization, and we've only looked at food really, is working. And in terms of the change strategy, there is some support clearly from the grassroots. Is it enough? Is it connecting? Is it becoming a global scale? Not so clear. From the global side, from the top-down policy changes, we clearly are getting some wind into our faces, right? So this is not the final answer. I think that's very clear. So can I ask everybody who's willing to cast their vote to vote for the paradigm which they feel is most appropriate to answer the challenges of the capitalist kind of meta-crisis, poly-crisis that we're facing? Would you go with Pieconomics? And again, you can see the summary here and on the website. Very much a neoliberal yellow paradigm. Would you go with Christian Felber, asking for lots of interventions focused on the common good matrix? Or would you go with indeed Helena's localization? Where is your heart? Please vote now on the chat. Okay, it looks very divided. Happiness, happy common pie. Okay, no, need to digest this further. I'm with you, Jean-Paul. I will follow, which is what was the case? Which is that? The combination, I guess.
Combination, yeah.
Okay, so I think that means we are not yet fully convinced, if I interpret this picture. Certainly, we're not all convinced of the same thing, right? So it's going to be very, very intriguing to see if at some point during the series, we all say, that's it, now we got it. Or if we're able, building on Adina's point, to build our own, right? Something that we take from everybody and then we build something which we like best. And with that, of course, the adventure continues, and I'm going to hand over to Kees just to close us off with a outlook of where we're going next.
Yes, so next month, which if Otti can show the next slide, we can also share the date with you. Yes, on July 16th. So we really hope that all of you will still be with us and not on holiday yet, because we have something really, really exciting. Because our guest of honor next month is nobody less than Robert Costanza, who is one of the leaders in economic thinking on well-being economics, GPI, as we mentioned earlier, but also one of the founders, the shoulders that a lot of other economists are standing upon from an ecological economics perspective, which is one of the most fundamental, profound new schools in economic thinking. So We are looking very much forward to have Robert in our midst. And
superb. And I want to close us here. And again, I hope this is helping all of us and all of you to get a little bit deeper behind the narratives, behind the popular thinking, in order to make your own choices as to where you want to commit your own energy and your own activism in trying to help us making capitalism a little bit better day by day by day. And with that, I would say thank you so much. Have a great rest of the week. Bring some of your friends next time if you feel there are other people in your network who would benefit from this or who could contribute to our lovely conversation, which we only started. And please come back, as Kiss is saying. With that, take good care and speak to you all soon. Bye.